Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that feels, well, incredibly relevant, even though the source material we're working with delves deep into ancient history and what some might call pretty radical economic theory.
It's definitely radical.
We're looking at a text titled Agrarian Revolution, and honestly, it completely flipped my understanding of how we feed the world.
It's a fascinating text.
Yeah.
It really does. It challenges some very, very deeply held assumptions, not just about farming, but about how society is even structured.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's just start with the hook right here, because if I were to ask you, or really anyone listening, how do we fix poverty for farmers? Or, how do we help the rural poor?
Right.
The standard answer, the benevolent answer, is usually give them land. Land to the tiller. Take the land from the big guys, give it to the little guys.
It sounds like justice.
It sounds like the right thing to do.
It does. It appeals to our sense of fairness. It's a very romantic kind of Robin Hood-style notion.
Exactly. But this source, it argues that giving land to the landless, if it's done incorrectly, might actually be a trap.
A trap, that's a strong word.
A huge one. It argues that it could worsen poverty, decrease food production, and create a system that is basically doomed to fail.
And that is a massive contradiction to unpack.
It is. It's suggesting that our best intentions, our good intentions, might be paving the road to starvation.
Which is why this text is so important. It isn't just about, farming techniques or crop rotation. It's a blueprint for a completely different way of organizing society. We're looking at excerpts regarding PROUT, that's progressive utilization theory, and it covers everything. It goes from the economic structure of ancient India to a critique of modern capitalism and communism, and then finally it lays out this almost futuristic proposal for cooperative living.
And I really want to set the tone right away, because when we talk about agrarian revolution or economic crises, it can get pretty gloomy.
Sure.
We picture dust bowls and famine, all that. But this text, it's surprisingly optimistic. It's not a story of doom. It's a story about unleashing potential. It's about the joy of collective progress.
That is such a key observation. The underlying theme here is that the scarcity we see, the poverty, the hunger, it's artificial. It's a design flaw in the system.
A design flaw, I like that.
And if it's a design flaw, it can be redesigned. We aren't fighting nature. We're fighting a bad system.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to start by looking backward at what the source calls the golden age of the elastic economy, how things used to work, and crucially, why that system broke.
Right, the diagnosis.
Then we're going to look at the copy and paste problem, specifically why India, for example, cannot just copy China's model, and we have some wild statistics on that.
Oh, the geography argument? Yeah, that's a big one.
Then we get to the big aha moment, this concept of the economic holding. And finally, we're going to walk through this 4-phase plan to revolutionize how we work and, well, how we live.
It's a journey, really, from the past through the messy present and into a potential future.
Let's dive right into history then, segment 1. The broken balance. The source talks about the economy of ancient India. Now, usually when I hear ancient India, I think of philosophy, yoga, maybe architecture. I don't think of elastic economics. What does that even mean?
Elastic is the perfect word here, actually. Yeah. The source describes a system that could stretch and adapt. In the Vedic age, society was divided by occupational classes, known as Varna.
Okay, Varna.
Now, we often think of this in terms of the later, much more rigid caste system that became oppressive, but the text is focused strictly on the economic function of it.
So it's about jobs, not just social hierarchy.
Exactly. You had specific groups for specific jobs, and that balance was critical. One class farmed, that was their job, full stop.
They were the agricultural specialists?
Precisely. Other classes, carpenters, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, physicians, clerks, they stayed in their lanes, they didn't farm.
So you didn't have a situation where, I don't know, a blacksmith decides he's having a bad year and just goes and tries to plant some wheat?
No. And because of that, there was no overcrowding in agriculture.
Yeah.
The text explicitly says people did not rush towards agricultural work as is happening today. It created a natural equilibrium. The farmers farmed, the artisans built, the merchants traded, everyone had their role.
And the state wasn't just sitting back and watching this happen, right? The text mentions that kings were basically acting like agricultural project managers.
It was very hands-on. The state monitored planting schedules, the use of manure, irrigation systems, using rivers and canals. It was a managed economy. But here's the part that really stood out to me.
Okay.
The state had the duty to confiscate land from landlords who didn't use it.
Whoa. Say that again?
If you were a landlord,
Yeah.
and you just sat on a bunch of land and let it lie fallow, the king would take it.
So you couldn't just hoard land as an investment.
No. If you kept land unutilized, it was transferred to someone who would utilize it. The value of the land was based entirely on its productivity, not on speculation or just holding a title deed.
It was a use it or lose it system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is a wild concept compared to today, where you could buy 1,000 acres, let it sit empty for 50 years, and just wait for the price to go up.
We treat land like a savings account.
Which contributes nothing to the collective economy. In this ancient model, the focus was entirely on output, on production. The source even mentions that the state fixed the price of produce.
Why would they do that?
So that the business class couldn't exploit the farmers. It was a protected, managed ecosystem designed for stability and production.
Okay, so we have this elastic, balanced system is humming along, and then the British arrive, and the source paints a pretty devastating picture of this disruption.
It's not a disruption, it's a demolition.
An economic demolition, that's a good way to put it.
It describes a complete collapse of that balance. The British government, according to this text, was indifferent to indigenous development. But it was more than that. It was an active dismantling of the existing structure.
They call it the clerk factory, right? That phrase really stuck with me.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? The British needed a massive administrative state to run the colony. They needed bodies to push paper, file records, manage the bureaucracy.
But they didn't want to pay British wages for those jobs.
Of course not. So they retooled the entire education system.
Just pause on that for a second. You have to imagine, right? You come from a long line of master carpenters or weavers. You have this hereditary skill, this pride in your craft.
A craft that has supported your family for generations.
And then suddenly, this new power structure comes in and says, no, that's not important anymore. The only way to get ahead, the only way to have status, is to sit at a desk and be a clerk.
It pulled people away from their hereditary trades. It completely devalued manual skill and elevated this idea of bureaucratic subservience.
And it wasn't just a pull factor, was it?
So you take a viable 20-acre farm and you cut it into 20 tiny 1-acre pieces to feed all these displaced artisans. And suddenly, no one has enough land to be efficient.
And the source draws a direct line from this chaos to the Great Famine of 1943.
It does. It mentions that during World War II, food imports stopped, which was a major blow. But the administration at the time, the Wavell administration, made it so much worse.
Oh.
They restricted the movement of food between provinces. They introduced a rationing system that basically trapped people. But the root cause, the text argues, was this a fundamental breakage of the economic balance. The engine was already broken, the war just overheated it.
It's a tragedy of mismanagement and structural destruction. And the source says this didn't just go away in 1947 when the British left.
No, absolutely not. The legacy remained. The text notes that even after independence, the government tried to solve the food problem by just increasing the area of arable land.
Just plant more land.
Plant more land, exactly, without fixing the productivity of the existing land, or, more importantly, addressing the fact that too many people were still trying to farm.
And there's a statistic here that it blew my mind. The source says a developed, balanced economy should have maybe 30 to 45% of its people in agriculture.
Correct. That's the sweet spot. Enough people to grow food efficiently, but enough people doing other things, manufacturing, science, art, to advance society as a whole.
And India, at the time this was written,
about 75%.
75%, 3/4 of the entire population trying to make a living from the soil.
And that leads to what economists call disguised unemployment.
Oh, okay, what's that?
You see people in the fields, they look like they're working, they are physically busy, but their labor isn't actually adding to the total production because there are too many of them on too little land.
So if 5 people are doing a job that only needs 2 people, 3 of them are disguisedly unemployed.
Precisely. They remain unemployed for most of the year. It is, as the source says, an enormous waste of human labor.
So we've established the diagnosis. The patient, the economy, is suffering from a severe imbalance. Too many people in farming, fractured land, and a history of colonial disruption.
That's the core problem statement.
Now, let's talk about the wrong cures. Because the source gets very, very spicy when it talks about politicians who try to offer quick fixes.
It certainly does. It warns against the copy and paste mentality.
And the big example is copying China. Apparently, there was a group of politicians saying, hey, look at China. They're industrializing, they're growing, let's do what they did. And the author of our source material is like, absolutely not. Why?
Geography is destiny. That's the core argument. The source says you cannot compare the two because their fundamental assets are completely different. You have to look at the numbers.
Let's look at the numbers.
The footnote in the source gives a really stark contrast. It claims China has approximately 11% arable land.
Only 11%. For a country that size, that seems incredibly low.
It is. A huge portion of China is mountains, deserts, or arid plateaus. It's physically difficult terrain for agriculture.
Okay, so China has little usable farmland. What about India?
India, the source claims, has about 89% arable land.
89. Wow. That is a massive difference in potential.
It's a night and day difference. So China has a huge population and very little land. The source argues that China's strategy under Mao Zedong was driven by desperation.
What do they mean by that?
They call it an insatiable hunger for land because they simply couldn't feed their own people with what they had. The text explicitly frames Chinese expansionism into Tibet, into parts of the Soviet Union, into India as an economic necessity for them.
The phrase used is grabbing land. They needed the dirt because they didn't have enough of their own.
Yes, but the argument is, why on earth should India copy a strategy born of scarcity when India is sitting on a mountain of untapped potential?
Right.
India doesn't need more land. It needs to use the land it has better.
It's like a guy with a fully stocked pantry breaking into his neighbor's house because the neighbor is hungry. Doesn't make any sense.
That is a great analogy.
You have the food, you just need to cook it properly.
And the source says exactly that. India suffers economic hardships today because its economic potential has not been properly harnessed. It is an internal problem, not an external one.
So copying China is out. But then there's the other popular solution, the one we touched on in the intro, land for everyone. The source calls this a defect.
This is a critical point in the text, and it requires us to sort of put aside our emotions and look at the math. The popular slogan is land to the tiller. Distribute the surplus land to the landless.
Which sounds great. If I'm a poor peasant, I've worked my whole life on someone else's farm, and you give me an acre of land, I'm happy. I feel like I've made it.
You are happy psychologically. The source calls it psychic satisfaction. You feel like an owner. You have dignity. You have a sense of pride.
Yeah.
But the source asks, what is the economic reality of that 1 acre?
I can guess. 1 acre isn't enough to really do anything with, is it?
Exactly. Let's run the business logic. On that 1 acre, can you justify buying a tractor?
No way. A tractor costs thousands. I'd never make that back on 1 acre.
Okay, so you're plowing by hand or renting an expensive bullock. Can you afford to drill a deep bore well for irrigation?
Probably not. I'm just waiting for the rain. I'm at the mercy of the weather.
So your costs are high because you're inefficient, and your risk is massive because you have no modern infrastructure. The source calls this an uneconomic holding. You are almost guaranteed to lose money.
So by giving me the land, you've actually just given me a debt trap.
Worse. You've given the nation a productivity trap, and here is the visualization that really blew my mind when I read it. The boundary lines.
Oh, this part. This is where the mental image really helps you get it.
Picture a 100-acre field. It's one smooth, continuous sheet of green. Now, chop it up into 100 separate 1-acre plots. What does every single new owner do first?
They put up a fence or a little mud wall. They mark their territory. This is mine.
Exactly. The source argues that if you add up the square footage of all those fences, all the little paths between them, all the boundary mounds, you are losing a massive percentage of the arable land just to draw lines in the dirt.
That is such a vivid and depressing image. We are literally shrinking the farm to build fences.
We are prioritizing the idea of mine over the production of food.
And what's the outcome for that new owner?
The new owner fails. He can't support his family on that tiny plot. So what does he do? He leases the land out to someone else and goes to the city to find work. He becomes a petty landlord.
He becomes the thing he was supposed to be replacing.
Yes. The source calls this the petit bourgeoisie problem. You haven't ended feudalism. You've just created millions of tiny, inefficient feudal lords.
And the politicians, the source implies they know this, right? They're doing it on purpose.
The text is quite cynical about that. It suggests politicians use these slogans to lure people in. They give them the land to get the vote, knowing full well it creates economic misery in the long run, despite the short-term psychic happiness.
It's a trap, a psychic trap baited with a land deed.
And it ultimately lowers national productivity. If you fragment the land, overall production goes down. And if production goes down, everyone starves, including the guy who was so happy to get his 1 acre.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem, And we've debunked the popular bad solutions. Now we need the big idea. The source introduces a concept called the economic holding. This seems to be the pivot point of the entire theory.
It is. This is the foundation of the solution. And the definition is simple but really profound. An economic holding is a unit of land where output exceeds input.
Output exceeds input. I mean, that sounds like basic business, but apply it to a farm.
It just means the farm has to be viable. It must produce enough to cover the costs of labor, seeds, water, and tools, and still provide a surplus for the family or the community to live on.
It has to be a profitable business unit, not a hobby garden you're subsidizing with another job.
Precisely. It has to be sustainable on its own terms.
And this isn't a fixed number, right? It's not like everyone needs 10 acres and we're done.
No, and that's where the nuance comes in, which I think is so important. The size of an economic holding is variable. It depends entirely on the fertility of the soil, the climate, the access to water.
And the source gives some really clear examples.
It does. In the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is some of the most fertile soil in the world, maybe 5 acres, is an economic holding. It's rich, things grow easily. You can get a lot of output from a relatively small area.
But if you go somewhere like Ladakh or the Nagpur Hills,
where it's rocky, arid, difficult terrain, you might need 15 or 16 acres just to get the same amount of output. So giving someone 5 acres in Ladakh is not an economic holding. It's a poverty trap.
So the goal of this agrarian revolution is to ensure that no one is farming a plot of land that is smaller than whatever the local economic holding size is.
Correct. The system needs to be intelligent enough to determine the minimum and maximum sizes for efficiency in each specific region. You can't have holdings that are too small to be productive, and you also want to prevent massive holdings that become exploitative.
Okay, but wait, here's the practical question. If I have 1 acre and my neighbor has 1 acre and the economic holding size for our area is 5 acres, what do? We can't just magically make the land bigger.
That is where the cooperative system comes in. This is the core of the PROU proposal. You don't make the land bigger, you combine the plots, you pool them.
Okay, cooperatives. Now that word has a lot of baggage. We've all heard stories of cooperatives that have failed. The source even acknowledges that.
It does. It confronts that failure head on, which is what I respect about this text. It contrasts the experience of Israel with India.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Why, according to the source, did it work so well in Israel?
The source attributes it to what it calls the surrounded by enemies mentality. The kibbutz system worked because there was an intense existential need for self-reliance. The spirit of the people was, we must succeed together or we will all perish together.
It was survival mode. The motivation was baked in.
Exactly. And in India. The source argues that many Indian cooperatives failed because they were political tools, not genuine economic movements. They lacked that internal spirit. They were imposed from the top down or managed poorly by political appointees.
The source actually lists 3 prerequisites for any cooperative to succeed.
It does. And they're really important. 1, morality. 2, strong supervision. And 3, wholehearted acceptance by the people. Without those 3 things, you just have another bureaucracy.
Wholehearted acceptance is the tricky part. You can't force people to share and cooperate. Or can you? Because that leads us right into the blueprint. The source outlines a 4-phase plan to move from this fragmented, desperate situation to a fully cooperative future. And it emphasizes that this is an evolution, not an overnight switch.
Right. You can't jump from feudalism to utopia in one day. You have to build the psychology for it.
Let's walk through these phases. Phase 1 is called consolidation.
This is the immediate fix. In phase 1, the source says the state must step in. It says that for anyone who owns an uneconomic holding, those tiny, doomed 1-acre plots we talked about, joining the cooperative is not optional. It's compulsory.
Compulsory? Okay, that sounds a bit forceful. That sounds like the government coming in and seizing the land.
It sounds like that, but the source makes a crucial distinction here that I think is brilliant. The ownership doesn't change.
Okay, you have to explain that. How can it be compulsory if I still own my land?
You keep your land deed. The piece of paper says, this 1 acre of land belongs to host speaker. Private ownership is recognized and protected, but you lose the right to farm inefficiently by yourself.
So I own the asset, but I don't get to manage the day-to-day operation.
Exactly. Think of it like owning stock in a company. You own a share of Apple. That doesn't mean you get to walk into the factory and tell them how to build the next iPhone.
That is a really useful analogy.
You own the equity. The experts run the system for maximum efficiency.
So I'm forced to pool my 1 acre with all my neighbors. We create a 100-acre block. And then what? The fences come down?
The fences come down, all that land that was being wasted on boundary lines gets cultivated.
Just doing that alone increases the amount of available land.
Instantly, without conquering anyone. And how do you get paid? This is the clever part. You get a dividend based on the share of land you put in. If you put in 1 acre out of 100, you get 1% of the produce that's reserved for landowners.
Okay, so I get a return on my asset.
A return on your capital. PLUS, you get paid wages for your labor if you work on the farm.
So I'm getting paid twice. Once for my asset, the land, and once for my actual work.
Exactly. It turns the land into a stock certificate, essentially. And because the 100-acre farm is now efficient, it's using tractors, it's using scientific methods, the total harvest is huge. So your 1% slice of that massive pie is worth way more than the whole of your tiny, inefficient pie ever was.
That sounds surprisingly reasonable. It's not seizing the land, it's just mandating efficient resource pooling. What about phase 2?
Phase 2 is expansion. Once phase 1 is working and people see the benefits, they see their neighbors getting higher yields, using better tools, making more money, you encourage everyone to join, even those who already have economic holdings.
So even the guy with the fertile 5-acre plot who's doing okay on his own looks over and says, hey, if I join that 100-acre co-op, we can afford a combine harvester.
Exactly. It becomes a gravitational pull of efficiency. People join because it makes clear financial sense, not just because they're forced to. The success of phase 1 becomes the marketing for phase 2.
Then we hit phase 3, rational distribution. Now this one sounds a bit more radical.
It is. This is where the definition of ownership starts to shift in a more fundamental way. In phase 3, the source says ownership is redefined based on 2 factors. 1, the minimum amount of land needed to maintain a family, and 2, the capacity to utilize the land.
Capacity to utilize. That sounds like that ancient model again. Use it or lose it.
It's a direct return to that principle. The idea is that you shouldn't own more land than you can effectively manage for the good of the community. It's a mechanism to stop land hoarding and speculation.
And finally, we get to phase 4, the ultimate goal, psychic expansion.
This is the utopian vision at the end of the road. Phase 4 is when the psychology of the people themselves changes. They stop thinking in terms of my plot and my profit and start thinking in terms of our collective welfare.
They work for the community because they want to, not because they have to.
Exactly. But the source has a massive flashing red warning sign here. It says, you cannot force this phase.
Right. It brings up the Soviet model.
Yes. The leaders of the Soviet Union, according to this text, tried to impose this collective psychology by brute force. They forced everyone onto collective farms before they were mentally or socially ready for it.
And the result was famine and ruin, catastrophic failure.
The source says this change must come from an internal urge. It has to be a psychological evolution that happens organically. If you try to legislate selflessness, you end up with tyranny.
But if you build a system where cooperation rewards everyone, like you do in phase 1 and 2, that selfless spirit might actually grow naturally over time.
That's the hope. It's a really nuanced take. It's not just capitalism bad, communism good, or vice versa. It's psychology meets economics. It recognizes that you have to fix the wallet before you can fix the heart.
You have to make it rational first.
It has to be rational. Economic systems are ultimately human systems.
Speaking of human systems, let's talk about the tools these humans are using. Segment 5, technology. Now we have to touch on the sacred cow issue, literally, because the source takes a very hard, very pragmatic stance against using animals for plowing. And I imagine this ruffles some feathers.
It goes directly against the Gandhian ideal of the rustic, self-sufficient village economy. The source essentially says nostalgia is keeping us poor.
And it boils it down to a battle between biology and engineering.
It really does. I mean, consider the energy audit of it. A bullock is a biological engine. It burns fuel, which is food 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Yep. Even when it's sleeping, it's burning calories. Even when the field is fallow for 6 months of the year, it's still eating.
It's an engine you can't turn off.
Exactly. A tractor. It consumes 0 resources when it's parked in the shed. For a pure efficiency standpoint, the animal is a constant drain on the national food supply.
But there's a soil science argument here too, isn't there? It's not just about the cost of feeding the animal. The source talks about churning the earth.
This part is fascinating. The source argues that a bullock plow, because it's not very powerful, merely scratches the surface of the land. It churns the same 6 inches of topsoil over and over, year after year, until the nutrients are completely exhausted.
It's like sleeping on the same side of the mattress for 10 years. It gets lumpy and useless.
That's a perfect analogy. A tractor, on the other hand, has the power to dig deep. It brings the rich, mineral-heavy subsoil up to the top and buries the exhausted topsoil down where it can rest and recover. It literally recycles the earth.
You can't do that with an ox.
You cannot do that with an ox unless you want to kill the ox.
Yeah.
The strain is too much.
And the ratio. The source says 1 tractor equals the work of 8 pairs of bullocks.
8 pairs. That's 16 animals. Think of the labor involved in just managing 16 animals versus 1 person driving 1 machine. The source is blunt about it. This is not the age for large animals.
Right.
It points out that Europe stopped using elephants and horses for heavy labor long ago. India must update its technology to compete and thrive.
But here is the fear, and it's a modern fear too, right, with AI and automation. If we bring in the tractors, won't the farmers lose their jobs? If 1 guy on a tractor replaces 16 guys with oxen, what do the other 15 guys do?
The host asks the right question, and it's the #1 objection you hear. But the source gives a very optimistic answer. Yes, they will lose those jobs, and that is a good thing.
How is losing a job a good thing? Explain that.
Because it frees them from drudgery. The goal of society shouldn't be to keep people working hard in the fields just for the sake of working. The goal should be to produce enough food for everyone with the least amount of human suffering possible.
So it's about freedom from toil. But where does that surplus labor go? They still need to eat.
The source envisions a natural shift to what it calls agro-industries. Instead of just growing wheat, you have factories in the local area processing flour, making bread, making pasta.
So value-added industries.
Exactly. You have new technical roles, tractor repair, soil science, irrigation management, and, the source says, intellectual pursuits.
Right.
If you aren't physically exhausted from following an ox in the sun all day, you have the energy to study, you can invent, you can create art.
Yeah.
The source specifically mentions the impact on women and children.
That part really stood out to me.
Mechanization frees women and children from hard field labor. It gives them the scope to develop themselves, to get an education. It links the village to the city standards of living.
So it's basically saying we want fewer farmers, but we want richer, smarter, better equipped farmers.
Precisely. The traffic jam on the farm clears up, and those people move on to new, more productive highways.
Okay, so we have the technology sorted out. Now let's talk about the money. Segment 6, the human element. We talked about the cooperative, but how exactly does the money get split? The source proposes a really interesting 50-50 model.
This is radical, and I think it's one of the most progressive ideas in the text. Inside the cooperative, 50% of the produce goes to the land shareholders, the people who own the deeds.
Your return on capital.
Exactly. The other 50% goes to the laborers, the people doing the actual work.
And remember, in most cases, you can be both.
Right. Those people will be both. But here's the progressive trend built into it. The source says that over time, the ratio should shift more toward the laborers.
So it rewards work over passive ownership eventually.
Yes. And it tackles the issue of management. In many failed cooperative, or even in old feudal systems, manager was just a title you gave your lazy nephew.
Honorary corruption, basically.
Exactly. PROUT says managers must be elected, and they must be paid proper salaries based on their intellectual expertise. It's a professional job. If you are smart enough to run a massive, high-tech cooperative farm, you should be paid well for that brainpower.
That makes sense. Now, there is a very important rule here about who gets hired. The text calls it decentralization and local labor.
This is a protectionist measure for local communities, and it's vital. The rule is simple. Local people get first priority for employment. Always.
Why is this so important?
Because the source argues that surplus labor is a myth. It's a myth caused by underdevelopment. If you have people standing around doing nothing, it's not because there are too many people, it's because you haven't built the industries to employ them yet.
So don't ship them out to the city to find work, build the city-style industries there.
Exactly. And conversely, don't import cheap labor from outside if your local people are unemployed. The source warns that if you allow outside labor to flood in, local resources like coal, tea, or the crops themselves will end up controlled by outsiders.
The local community loses sovereignty over its own wealth.
And that creates a dangerous situation, as the text says. It advocates for 100% employment of the local population before any new people are brought in.
There is a funny little anecdote in the text about surplus intellectual labor.
Oh, yes. The people who will work as clerks for 30 rupees but refuse to be porters because it's beneath them.
I think we all know that type. I have a degree. I'm not carrying that bag.
And the source is wonderfully pragmatic about it. It says, fine, don't force them to carry bags. Build industries in that region that require less manual labor and more intellectual work. Adapt the economy to the people you have.
Adapt the economy to the people. That is a recurring theme, isn't it? Okay, finally, we have to talk about taxes. The favorite subject of nobody, but it's crucial here.
And the source has a revolutionary take on it. It critiques the current system of cash taxes.
Because farmers don't always have cash, even if they have food.
Right. If you have a great harvest, but the market price crashes, you're rich in produce, but poor in cash, and you still owe the taxman. Or, if you have a crop failure, you have no produce and no cash. It's incredibly stressful.
So what's the proposal?
Back to the future. Return to the ancient Hindu system. Tax and goods.
Pay your taxes in pumpkins.
Essentially, yes. The proposal is that the government collects, say, 25% of the produce directly from the cooperative.
And why is this so much better?
There are several reasons. One, the farmer or the cooperative doesn't have to stress about market fluctuations. If I grow 100 kilos of rice, I give the government 25. If I only grow 10 kilos, I give them 2.5. It scales automatically with my success or failure.
And what does the government do with all that rice and all those pumpkins?
This is the genius part. The government builds national grain banks. It stores the produce.
So it's a built-in insurance policy against famine.
Exactly. Instead of a national vault full of gold, you have a national vault full of grain. If there's a drought next year in one part of the country, the government opens the doors and feeds the people.
And it also helps with distribution to the cities.
Yes. The government becomes the direct bridge between the rural producer and the urban consumer. It completely removes the middleman.
And the source hates intermediaries.
It calls them parasites. This system allows the state to manage food security directly and efficiently.
So let's just zoom out for a second. We have covered a lot of ground. We've gone from the Varna system of ancient India all the way to a high-tech, tractor-driven, cooperative future where you pay your taxes in wheat.
It is a comprehensive vision from top to bottom.
It really is. And it's not just about farming. When you step back, it's about dignity. It's about shifting from the image of the desperate peasant struggling alone on a tiny plot of land to a community thriving together with high-tech tools and economic security.
It's a fundamental shift from struggle to thriving. And notice the role of leadership in all this. The source mentions the Sadvipra.
The spiritual moralist.
Yes. This idea that this economic revolution requires moral leadership. It's not just about spreadsheets and crop yields. It's about having people who are genuinely dedicated to the welfare of all, who can supervise these cooperatives with honesty and integrity.
Because without that moral core, the whole system corrupts.
It always comes back to the human element. It always does.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought, something that really struck me while reading this. The source fundamentally challenges our obsession with ownership. We think freedom means owning a piece of land. This is mine, keep out.
The private fortress, yeah.
Right. But the source suggests that true economic freedom isn't about owning the dirt, it's about the security of the produce.
Now that is the provocative thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
If the government functioned as a massive food bank, if the cooperatives guaranteed 100% employment, if you knew for a fact that you would never starve, and that your labor would always be valued and rewarded, would you still care so much about owning that one specific acre?
Would that obsession with my private acre just disappear if the fear of starvation disappeared with it?
That is the question. Is our deep-seated desire for ownership actually just a symptom of our deep-seated insecurity?
Wow, that is definitely something to chew on.
Indeed.
We hope this deep dive gave you some new perspectives on, well, the ground beneath your feet. It's not just dirt, it's the foundation of how we live together.
And how we could potentially live better.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.